Hello, everybody. It's hot here, so 103 outside. It's then pretty hot inside the house, so I'm going to be doing this without my shirt on. And so I'll pull this up, and I hope I'm going to be sharing the screen. And then I have to wait a second to get the slideshow going, and we'll get it going. I hope you're seeing um, what I'm seeing. We'll get rid of that. So we're going to be watching this movie, the Leopard, 1958 movie by Lampedusa. Highly recommended. I know some history professors who think it's one of the best historical movies. What was I think initially a truncated English dub version, it seems like it is now back to being full length in English, which is 3 hours. So we may need to divide that up beyond tomorrow. We'll see what the feeling is. So a classic, Scorsese, I think, ranks it in his top 10. Others put it in the top, at least the top 100. And here are the main characters. But before I introduce them, I want to give the background because there's a lot going on in Sicily, specifically Palermo, where we're going to be spending a lot of time. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on this history on Palermo. And I'm going to start in 1816 because the movie's in 1860, so that gives us a fairly short run up. I'll make a few exceptions, as you'll see, but I'm going to try to focus on at the time of the movie and what has happened. Um, and we'll go a little bit beyond because there's a revolution and the unification of Italy, big events that I'm going to try to cover. Um, so the first thing is the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which is an interesting concept. I think a lot of us have been scratching our head with what's that all about. I hope at the end it'll be clear. So the dynasties are Bourbon dynasty, and I'll explain what that is a bit later. But the kingdoms of Naples and Sicily were officially merged in that year. And so there's still some background we got to cover. The House of Bourbon originated in France, of course, 1500s Capetians. It has had many cycles of falling and being restored. Uh, uh, in 1700s, there was this interesting war of Spanish succession. The Bourbons were trying to get on the throne of both France and Spain, and the other European nations went into an alliance and said, no, you can't do that. That would make the Bourbons too strong. And the Allies won, and the Bourbons had to renounce their French claim. But now, the more stable branch that ruled Spain, we see that popping up in, of all places, Sicily and Palermo. Um, at the time, they had to, the Bourbons had to cede Sicily to Savoy. And we'll be talking about Savoy in just a second, a key dynasty. Um, and then Naples, they had to give to the Austrian Habsburg sphere of influence. Um, so just gonna skip back a little bit to the guy who unites them, his Ferdinand, and back in 1759, he found himself as the king of Naples as Ferdinand IV and the king of Sicily as Ferdinand III. Go figure. It's really hard, and that's what the dynasties in Europe resulted in. So he's the king of both. He was deposed twice from the throne of Naples by Republican revolutionaries in 1799 and by the French invasion, Napoleon in 1806. After Napoleon's defeated, he's restored. So that's Ferdinand. And here the coat of arms, I throw it in just to see that the king of Sicily was distinct from the king of Naples. But then in 1816, when he's the king of the two Sicilies, he gets a new coat of arms, which is strikingly similar to the one in Naples. Um, and you remember he's, because of that War of Spanish Succession, Austria has a sphere of influence in Naples and Sicily. Um, and that was probably okay with Ferdinand because if there was disorder, Metternich, who was the chancellor in Austria, could restore order by sending troops. So he was able to reign as an absolute monarch. They tried to get him to change it, like in this insurrection in Palermo in 1820. It was a secret society of army officers, the Carbonari, and Ferdinand was forced by them to sign on to a constitution that removed his um, absolute power. So it's a constitutional monarchy. And Sicily themselves were saying, we don't want to be part of even a constitutional monarchy. But that was immediately suppressed by uh, uh, Ferdinand. And he sent his troops from Naples. Neapolitan means anything to do with Naples. And so now, though, because he used Austrian troops to get the revolutionaries in Palermo under control, now Austria had intervened a lot more. Their fingerprints were all over. In 1848, there was a general revolution across Europe, and that weakened Austria. So it's kind of a new ball game. But in Sicily, the Bourbon dynasty had evolved from Ferdinand to Francis II. So he's a key character, and he's in the background in the movie that the Leopard that we're going to be watching. And he now reigns over the two Sicilies, the kingdom of two Sicilies. And all of a sudden, though, he finds himself facing rebellion. And who's that? So this is Garibaldi. He was a strong nationalist who was also an excellent military strategist. Um, he's from Nice. He's not from southern Italy. He's from northern Italy, right on the border with France. And when he was born, Nice was a part of an Italian dynasty. We'll get to the details in just a second. Um, but but he was resentful that the French had annexed his home city, and his first goal was to get his supporters to help him kick the French out of Nice. But Cavour, who's a major player, and you're going to meet him, he's from Turin in the Piedmont area, which also is linked to Sardinia. I'm saving that for later. But his co-nationalist, Cavour, was terrified that Garibaldi, by going for Nice first, was going to provoke a war with France. So he said, no, Garibaldi, you know what? We're going to do the Southern strategy. Let's go and start in the South and work our way up. And of course, that's the strategy that ultimately succeeded. So credit Cavour. Um, so they launched from Genoa. That's where Garibaldi got his first recruits from Turin and the Piedmont. And they went down, got a boat in Genoa, two steamships, and off they went to Sicily. And they landed at Marsala, which you can see is on the west coast of Sicily in May of 1860. And he goes with very few men, but there's plenty of eager volunteers. So he creates a Southern army by his own charisma. And he names it the Expedition of 1,000 because without any trouble, by the time he gets to Marsala, he has 1,000 people who've joined him. And so there's Marsala in the background. And they're called red shirts. They decide to wear red shirts. Uh, I don't know why. It makes it easier for somebody to shoot at you. But during the wars of Italian unification, they're up against the Austrians, which got the sphere of influence powers in the War of Spanish Succession. And they're also against the local Bourbons, the dynasty of two Sicilies. It's Francis II, and also the Papal States. They're conservative Catholics, and they don't want change or rebellion. And so off they go. It's interesting that later, at the end of all this, Garibaldi will go to South America and dabble in revolution there. And he ultimately becomes known as the hero of the two worlds, the red shirt uniforms on the first two, but they like to dress up. The first big battle is at Calatafimi, and I think that's not far from Palermo at all. So we might add that to our itinerary. And so the 1,000 soon swelled to 4,000. And after this battle, which the red shirts win, Garibaldi proclaims himself a dictator in the name of Victor Emmanuel. Who is Victor Emmanuel? We're going to go into that in detail. So just hold that for a moment. But that is Cavour's king up in Turin in the Piedmont, and also of Sardinia. Uh, so that's Victor Emmanuel. Um, Garibaldi then has Palermo in his sights. And off he goes, crossing a major bridge, which we'll probably discover, the Ponte del Miraglio. So you all are going to help me learn Italian and pronounce these words. Starts beacon fires so that everybody knows he's there and can join. And he starts the siege, street fighting, barricades, and all of a sudden, Francis II calls his generals together in Naples and says, how many troops? And they said, we can do 25,000. So they join, and we've got the siege of Palermo. Naples gets there with their ships and bombards Palermo, almost destroying it. Here's a barricade that was thrown up as part of the street fighting. It's on Via Toledo, so just keep that in mind. And here's Via Toledo after the bombing. And I don't know if this is the exact site of the barricade. It might have been, but it's the site also of a Dominican monastery. Um, so they storm the jail, release political prisoners. Maybe we'll see this as on the shore, so Castella Mar or Mari. And then Porta Felice, another barricade. And after a lot of dying, there's a British admiral who comes in and mediates a ceasefire. And the 4,000 Garibaldi troops are doing so well that the 25,000 troops from Naples agree to leave. And they, in so doing, Garibaldi's aim of demonstrating the weakness of Francis the Second has a great success, and Garibaldi's fame spreads far and wide. Here there is another scene of an attack. This one at a convent. Um, and finally, uh, uh, he is successful and declares victory at the Fontana Pretoria. So I'm sure we'll find that in our time in Palermo. Uh, 6 weeks later, he marches up and arrives in Messina. And within a week, the citadel there surrenders to him. And this is the Strait of Messina, not far at all over to Calabria. Um, so uh, this was the march to Messina. Um, and here from a hill behind Messina, you can see Mount Etna. Um, and I thought I liked geographic maps. Here's an even bigger one that shows how the mountains go just right through the center of Italy. and it certainly defines a basin, the Po River basin, coming down from the Alps, and of course you have Milano and over here Turin. But we're going to see that early kingdoms whose names we have to learn are very close to Switzerland and France. So just keep that in mind. And the interesting thing is because of Cavour's encouragement, the beginning of the rebellion is in Sicily, and it's going to spread like wildfire up the West Coast in particular. First to Naples, where we'll be going along the Amalfi Coast. Um, uh, and remember, a part of this uh, uh, kingship of that's centered in Turin, it is also includes Sardinia. And we'll see how that came to be. But it's mostly begins in the south and the west, all along here. Not Rome is about the last one to join the unification. And so here are the major players. So now it gets interesting. We're talking about personalities, and in the movie, they'll be talking a lot about Garibaldi, and I think they're going to mention all these other characters. This is Cavour, and this is Mazzini, who was even more idealistic than Garibaldi. He believed in democracy and republicanism and self-rule, a classic European liberal, and he never compromised on that. That's Mazzini. And this is Victor Emmanuel. That Victor is going to be a common name when we get to talking about Italian dynasties, and I'll tell you why that is. So Mazzini marches on, and Francis II finally retreats from Naples, um, and Cavour makes a deal with the Pope. So I'm leaving out a lot of details, but Rome was not interested in joining this, of course. The Vatican didn't want to risk a power base in unrest. So Cavour strikes a deal with the Pope. And so, to his credit, Garibaldi sees that you have to compromise, just like our founding fathers had to compromise on slavery. Of course, we had to pay for that later. But their founding fathers needed to compromise with the Pope. Mazzini never agreed to that. And so here we have the three symbolically, Garibaldi's in the middle, because Cavour's the most pragmatic, and because he's the one that gave up Garibaldi's hometown of Nice, he distrusts Cavour. And nevertheless, he accepts the compromise, and he turns over his military power to the king, Victor Emmanuel II. And so he also gave up his dictatorial power, of course. And then Garibaldi goes in to retirement after unifying at least the southern part of Italy. And this is a recreation of a famous moment where Garibaldi finally meets Victor Emmanuel face to face as arranged by Cavour. And he calls him immediately king, you're king of Italy. He doesn't call him the king of Sardinia, Piedmont, which he had been. But all this is going to make King Victor Emmanuel, his kingdom, much bigger than Sardinia and Piedmont. But that's the dynasty, and it's going to last until 1948, after World War II. So now people are talking about unification. The Kingdom of Italy, the capital was moved from Turin, which had been the capital for Sardinia, Piedmont. It's moved first to Florence and then finally to Rome. The Pope comes around 10 years later. Venice 8 years or 6 years later, and now you really have a totally unified Italy. This is the two persons in the last slide, Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel, entering Pope Naples together. Excuse me. They're riding on horseback right next to each other, and the people are cheering. King Francis II, he goes with his wife 30 miles up the coast to Gaeta, where he leaves. No, ending Bourbon rule. So uh, we'll see that one of the characters in Leopard will comment on all these changes as he witnesses the middle class displacing the ruling aristocracy. Um, but he uh, uh, has the opinion that things really aren't going to change that much, and that's what the movie really deals with. Um, uh, so, uh, uh, and so, what is this Piedmont? What does that mean? And the kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, what is that? And it's important because we can see at the time of this movie, it's a springboard for unification. It's Cavour working with Garibaldi, working out a successful strategy. And it's even been called the Piemontization, the unification of Italy, the Piedmontization. So the Piedmont, new vocabulary word. How did the Piedmont evolve? It's the House of Savoy, and their dynasty, the Savoy dynasty, will supply the kings of Italy, just like there is a Prince of Wales in England. The Prince of Piedmont was the next king until the end of the dynasty after World War II. Um, so, how about Sardinia? Let's do Savoy first. Where does that come from? Well, this is the heartland of Savoy. And what is it around? It's around Lake Geneva. It's all the way up in Switzerland, the heartland of Savoy. And this is around the 5th century, around Lake Geneva. And the area in light green is Burgundy in France. So Savoy is not typically Italian at all, but as history unfolds, they supply the royalty. And here's Lake Geneva here. And then by 1494, the Duke of Savoy has really expanded. Look at all the territory he's taken, and right in the middle of it is Turin. This is a little bit lighter red up here, so that the House of Savoy is eventually going to lose that. But here's Nice, right on the border with France, where Garibaldi's from. And Genoa is right down here. They've got their own republic going on. What happened? Well, Lyon is over here in France, and we've already talked about the separate kingdoms of Sicily and the separate kingdom of Naples. They're separate until 1816. Now, the Kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, comes into establishment in 1796. And again, we've talked about Spain, but the union of the crowns of Aragon and Castile, at that time, Sardinia was part of the Spanish Empire. They were very interested in having a place where their ships could dock. And Sardinia was the place. But formally in 1720, the Duke of Savoy said, "Hey, let's enlarge our mainland holdings and just fold in Sardinia." Was it colonization? Sure, a little bit of that. But thank goodness they had it. Napoleon chased the king of Sardinia, Piedmont, out of the mainland, and he stayed in Sardinia until Napoleon fell. There's an echo of that in Brazil, interestingly enough. The king of Portugal was chased out by Napoleon, and he went to Brazil, where he was famously turned off by all the beach culture that was there. And then remember, Napoleon's from Corsica. Corsica's right here, right in between Sardinia and the Piedmont. All right. So onward and forward. We're going to see as unification proceeds that here are the years where Italy expands. And we're going to see that the earliest on board was the Kingdom of Sardinia. It's interesting that a lot of times Piedmont is dropped and it's just called the Kingdom of Sardinia. But always understand the Kingdom of Sardinia includes this big part of northwestern Italy. And here's Savoy on this map, at least. They show exactly where it was, and that it went to France along with Nice in 1860. So just keep that in mind. Italian unification in the Italian language is referred to as risorgimento. Risorgimento. You guys will help me with this stuff. And so uh, here's how things expand. Bicolor Venice joins, as I said, in 1866, and Rome in 1870 with this color coding. A little bit in 1860, I forgot to mention uh, Lombardy. That's where Milano is, in Parma. Uh, okay. So the as I said, and you could see from the last map, uh, they ironically, from Garibaldi's point of view, uh, gave up Savoy, and ceded the county of Nice to France. So that's the blue part that they gave up. Um, and down here is the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which had existed, as I said, since 1816. And this is where Garibaldi starts and has his success. Um, Victor Emmanuel, let's talk about him. So Sardinia, Piedmont becomes so powerful that they're contribute to the Crimean War, where they're allied with the Ottomans, the British, the French, against, of course, the Russians. Um, but Victor Emmanuel had great success in enlarging, including Genoa as a buffer state. So they lost Nice, but they got Genoa as a buffer state. So Victor Emmanuel, he gets on the throne in the 1849s. Um, Victor Emmanuel the First was Napoleon's time, and he was involved with the other kings of Europe in reversing Napoleonic reform. So that's Victor Emmanuel, number one. But it's number two that's going to be the player in this time period, the great unification of Italy that starts in Palermo. Um, uh, so, uh, and this is Cavour. Okay, so he's a nobility, he's a count, centered in Turin with its industrialization. So it's the industrial part of Italy. Um, and the the reason that they gave so much to France was in this battle, a war against Austria in 1859. And remember, Austria had a sphere of influence in southern Italy, of all places. Um, as a reward for France siding with the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont, is they needed some of the spoils. And so I'm going to skip some of this in the interest of time. I'm sure we'll have time to talk about it in more detail on the trip. And uh, so there was a little bit of a spat about the settlement and who Austria would cede Lombardy to. And Victor Emmanuel became agreeable to compromise for his fellow king, Napoleon III, who was a distant nephew of the Napoleon, but had taken the kingdom of France back as a reaction to the revolution of 1848 that affected Paris more than any other capital, actually. Um, so Victor Emmanuel and Cavour had a little bit of disagreement on how to let Austria surrender. Um, so Garibaldi's big decision at the time, as he rolled north and approached Naples, was he going to go with the constitutional monarchy that Cavour was presenting, the Kingdom of Sardinia, number one, or was he going to go with a republic? And Mazzini was for that. But he broke with Mazzini. He allied himself with the monarchy that Cavour was touting, the Kingdom of Sardinia, and he was ultimately caught in the middle. Now we get to the movie. So there's aristocracy in the movie, played by Burt Lancaster. He is Prince Don Fabrizio Salina. Also, because everybody's got two names. Also, he's from the Corbera region. So you may hear that mentioned too, but also the Prince of Salina. And he's a nobleman, as I said earlier, and he's afraid he's going to lose his privilege. And I think the movie starts at his villa. The second major character is his goddaughter, Claudia Cardinale. She's Angelica. Of course, has two names that are Bastian. And this is the love interest, Tancredi Falconeri. And he is, by the end, portrayed as being an opportunistic person. He's the Don's nephew. And at the beginning of the movie, he's all in with the red shirts as they're marching north, and as they land on the coast of Sicily. And the Don, Burt Lancaster, accepts this nephew's romanticism with some whimsical sympathy. And their interaction is important in this movie because their relationship is a metaphor for all of Italy and what all of Italy is going through. This is actor plays one of Garibaldi's generals. So the interaction between the nephew and the general is important. And then and Angelica's father, he is nouveau riche. He is a land speculator. He knows how to handle money, and he's dabbling in politics. And when Garibaldi wins, then everybody is supposed to pick a member for the new National Assembly. And you'll see in this election to get zero votes on the other side requires some corruption that Burt Lancaster witnesses. And so there's going to be a big party. And of course, because he's the money man, the nouveau riche speculator, he's invited and brings Angelica. And he sees immediately that there's um, chemistry between the nephew Tancredi and his goddaughter Angelica. And he thinks, that's not so bad because he's going to need financial backing at some point. Burt Lancaster doubts that he's going to be able to earn a living as a member of the nobility, and it wouldn't hurt to have money in the family. And then there's a count that is going to visit him. And the count, this is a little bit more about the actor. I'm going to skip that. But the count says, we're both nobility together. I think you should join the Senate. He's asking Burt Lancaster to join the Senate. And we're certainly in this revolution and fight for independence. We're dealing with a lot of people from the streets, poor, ignorant, and we need somebody like you in the movement. But the Don, sometimes referred to the Prince Don, Burt Lancaster, prefers the traditions to the delusions of modernity. So there's a theme for the movie. And he terms his brand of aristocratic rulers like himself, like the Count, as being leopards, thus the name of the movie. And that they're being replaced by middle-class bureaucrats who he thinks are jackals and hyenas. And all of this is being supported by the sheep, the general public. So we can see a real metaphor for what's going on for all of Italian politics. And at one point, he's so upset by what's going on, he goes to Palermo. And it's unclear to me, I can't remember whether it's before or after Garibaldi conquers the town and all that street fighting. Finally, what the Count wants Burt Lancaster to do is run for the Senate so he can go with him to the new parliament, which because the new kingdom of Italy, the center of it is in the dynasty of Sardinia, Piedmont, and the head of that is in Turin. And so this is what it looked like on the opening of Parliament. There was some continuity with the Parliament of the Kingdom of Sardinia. And I think I said before it lasted till 1948. It was 1946. 1946. The new Italy, and Garibaldi hands over his power to King Victor Emmanuel, who has a newly formed army, and Burt Lancaster really, as the nephew, changes his allegiance from Garibaldi to the king. He sees that Tancredi will be who will succeed because he's an opportunist who will flourish in the new society. So this movie addresses major themes, and there's some disappointment. Cavour got what he wanted, but Garibaldi wanted to see Rome, his red shirts in Rome, and that never happened. Italy never got Nice back, his home town. And for the sake of the movie, what was promised to the Sicilians is they were the beginning of the revolution. They were promised the republic, which they had been fighting for, and the big uprising of 1820 in Palermo was all about. Um, uh, but that republic wouldn't come until the fall of the constitutional monarchy in 1946. It's amazing they made it through the war. And as for great economic gains, which were promised, nope. Sicily would remain uh, poor. So that's essentially where I'm going to quit. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'm sorry that this was delayed, but it's just a fascinating history, and this is a great historical movie. So I hope it helps us prepare for tomorrow. Uh, so long.